Hey guys, what's going on? It's your boy Luke here for another NFL live stream. Here for our Week 9 main slate live stream, just in general. We're going to talk about our player pool. We'll talk about some of our favorite stacking options. Of course, if there's any live questions, that's what this live chat is here for. Make sure to go ahead and put them down there. We can do season-long stuff. We can do DFS stuff, whether it's for FanDuel, Draftkings, whatever you guys want to talk about. But without further delay, let's hop right into it. So we're going to start off with Patreon projections for this week. So got to go ahead and bring them up here. We're going to start off with our quarterbacks or our favorite stacks to target. Cool, you guys should have it up here on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and double check my setup here for the live stream, make sure we're all set, which it looks like we are. So on here, these are my Patreon projections for the NFL. So right here, these are my quarterback rankings. You can see, obviously, we have projected points on there, ownership, and of course, whether they are in my player pool or whether they're a top stack of mine. I added this top stack tool over here because not every quarterback I play every week is somebody that I'm going to be willing to stack. And not everybody in this top stack column is going to end up making my player pool as a stack. They're just the people I'd be willing to go to in that type of circumstance. Stacking in terms of NFL DFS become a little bit outdated at this point. You've seen plenty of people take down tournaments with one-offs at quarterback, singular stacks, people without run backs, that kind of thing. So something I've started to incorporate into my process. I'd say about 40% of my lineups are stacks, just not the usual 70, 80% that it might have been in the past. Let's talk about the top option on the board, who's Josh Allen. And I'm a little bit unsure of what to do with him this week. You can see he's in my player pool. He is somebody I would consider a top stack just because he projects out so well. Obviously, the Jaguars have been absolutely atrocious on the defensive side of the ball. But with Josh Allen, we're looking at high ownership. We're also dealing with relatively high price tag. We're trying to stack him up. Stephon Diggs is a very good price this week. He's definitely going to be the chalky option there. Cole Beasley's a little bit priced up. Same thing with Emmanuel Sanders. Sorry, the third wide receiver there. While they do have a cheaper tight end option, I do think that this stack is just going to be overutilized. You're going to see it used in most lineups. And I definitely think there's a circumstance out there where they don't go out there and throw for 300, 400 yards. They get it done with the running game. Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, both of them have gotten a ton of touches this year, particularly in positive game scripts, which we expect against this Jaguars team. So I'm still going to have them in my player pool. It's just not somebody I'm overly thrilled about getting to this week. Obviously a little bit expensive, and I'm not necessarily sure that this game flow is as advantageous as people are making it out to be. Again, it's not a bad play, right? But we just have to take a look at the ownership and the sentiment around them. People are treating it like an absolute smash spot, like Josh Allen's going to go out there, get you 40 points guaranteed or something like that. You can see he's one of my highest projected quarterbacks on the slate at 21.6 points. But people like Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, right, in terms of points per dollar, all projected better. So it comes down to the ownership game for me, and the fact that he's the highest owned of the bunch. He's the top of the board, right? A lot of casuals, you're just going to immediately see Josh Allen and click him in. It's going to be something I have to keep an eye on when we get a little bit closer to lock. Obviously, these ownership numbers get refined as we get a little bit closer to them. He may come in even higher owned. He might come in a little bit lower owned. Just something we have to keep an eye on. Let's talk about some of the guys I do like up top here. I mean, Pat Mahomes, he's going to turn it around at some point. It's going to happen in emphatic fashion. Obviously, this Packers defense is definitely one of the better squads in the NFL. They have a very good secondary. They're also getting a lot healthier. Getting a lot of people back from the IR and whatnot. So it's not the best matchup on paper, especially as it looked earlier on in the week. But a lot of those guys out on defense, they lit up a ton of points. But with all those guys back, week one aside, they looked extremely good with all of those guys in the lineup. But I do like Patrick Mahomes. He's going to turn it around at some point. He's one of the best talents we've seen in the NFL, perhaps ever. So I'm buying back into that long-term form. My two favorite options, though, are a little bit cheaper. So Patty Mahomes is obviously up there at $7,800. I'm going to have a majority of my exposure at quarterback with Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert. So these are by far my favorite plays on the slate here. Both of them are in very positive game scripts. This Ravens-Vikings game is going to shoot out. These teams both of them are very prone to shooting out. The Vikings especially so this year. That's why you've seen so much production from that Vikings offense. It hasn't necessarily been because they are efficient on the offensive side of the ball. They've just been in these shootouts, been in games where they've been in these positive game scripts, literally week in and week out. The Vikings have only had one game where they've scored less than 20 points. So, again, a team that likes to score some points. Same thing with the Ravens. We already know that. So the last time we saw Lamar Jackson in one of those shootouts was when he played against that Colts team. You guys remember he nearly scored 40 fantasy points. I like going there a lot. Justin Herbert against this Eagles team. It's another one of those games that's going to shoot out. You have two efficient offenses, two teams that also play with a ton of pace. They play with a ton of plays. So Herbert right now, he's still technically questionable. This is the last injury report I saw, but he's expected to suit up. I don't think anyone expects him to be out for this game. So I'm treating him like he's in. And again, you can see on paper that this matchup doesn't look the best. That's just because the Eagles have lit up a ton of rushing touchdowns. They've still been, about middle of the road in terms of points allowed per game. And they've been prone to shooting out as well. I mean, Jalen Hurts, just look at last week. They scored 37 points, obviously lit up a ton of the points against them in garbage time. So it doesn't really tell the whole story there. But if the Eagles are going to be efficient on offense, that means the Chargers are going to have more than enough opportunity. If the Chargers are extremely efficient on offense, which I expect, by the way, I expect Justin Herbert to have a massive game here. He had a very bad week last week. The week before that, he was atrocious as well. He's not somebody that we see kept down for very long. This guy's very good at bouncing back. I think Justin Herbert is going to be potentially the best quarterback in the NFL in 1 or 2 years. So again, somebody I'm buying back in on a long-term type of perspective. Just because he's had a few down weeks doesn't mean I'm going to downgrade him in my rankings. That's bound to happen from time to time. Even the best players in the world, like a Patrick Mahomes, are going to have some downturn games. Targeting them when they're lower owned, targeting them when they're lower priced as a result, is actually a very plus EV situation. So that's where I'll be. Dak Prescott expected to suit up as the starter. I did not expect that earlier on in the week. I expected them to be a little bit more cautious with him. So obviously Cooper Rush has been demoted to out in my projections. We have Dak Prescott as starting. It's a decent matchup, right? We don't know how effective he's going to be because of that injury. I don't expect it to hamper him too much. Still nearly a 20-point projection. Just not somebody who's making my list because I like Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert a whole lot more. Joe Burrow, if you guys saw my fades and sleepers, you guys know I'm not huge on this Bengals offense. Not only are they dealing with the Browns defense, which has been really good at times, they've gone exposed a few times as well. Last week against the Steelers, it's not like they lit up a ton of points, but they were a lot more effective than they have been against other teams. And then against the Chargers, obviously, that was nearly an 80-point over-under game. So they've been exposed at times, but other than those two games, they've been extremely stout. They've controlled the time of possession. They've been able to hold teams, limit their amount of plays on offense. And if that's the case, this Bengals offense you're going to want to avoid, right? If the Browns are able to hold the ball, let's say 35, 40 minutes in this game out of the 60, it's going to be a very bad situation on that Bengals side. Now we go down to Jalen Hurts there at $6,700. He's on the other side of that Charger stack. So you can see he's also somebody I have in my player pool. I'm less likely to stack them as I was earlier on in the week, just because of Jalen Hurts' rushing upside. They've also been rushing the ball a lot more in Philly of late, ever since Miles Sanders got out of the lineup, which doesn't necessarily make sense to me. Miles Sanders, he's a better rushing threat than all of the guys that they're using right now, arguably better out of the backfield as a wide receiver. So perhaps that's why they were using him more in that type of fashion. But I still like Jalen Hurts here. You can use maybe a one-off stack. I just don't want to go for a full-on, 2-3 player stack in this situation. I think pairing him up with a Goddard makes a lot of sense, or Devonta Smith. Both of them project out very well for their price tags this week. I'm just not necessarily sure to go to both of them. Talk about this Kirk Cousins stack. Obviously, I said I think this Vikings Ravens game is going to be a shootout. So I just like the Lamar Jackson side a little bit better because he has that rushing upside. But Kirk Cousins has been extremely efficient to this point of the year. He's $6,200. You can pair him up with those elite options on that team. Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. You go to KJ Osborne. You have cheap options at tight end with Tyler Conklin. I like going to those stacks a lot more. Derek Carr is a sleeper pick of mine this week. I think that it's a decent matchup against this Giants team. And overall, I think he's a little bit underpriced. Matt Ryan here, he's a little bit underpriced against the Saints team. It's a tough matchup, that's for sure. But Matt Ryan's been a lot better than people want to give him credit for this year. So you can see he's not one of my top stacks or anything like that, but he's cheap enough to where you can use him in cash. You can use him as a one-off, whatever you need to do. Mac Jones down here against the Panthers. It's just a good matchup in terms of over-under, in terms of game script, that kind of thing. We don't know if the Panthers are going to have Sam Darnold at quarterback. We don't know if they're going to be playing P.J. Washington. So that should be of note up here with Sam Darnold, who I have as questionable still. He did make it through the concussion protocol, so he is healthy. He's going to be active for today. We just don't know if he's going to be starting. So I still have him down there as questionable. I don't have PJ Walker. Sorry, it's not PJ Washington. Thinking about basketball right now. PJ Walker, we're not sure if he's going to start or he's going to be the backup. So we'll get that news right around 11 o'clock. So anybody that's on the Patreon, I will post the update right around 11:15 a.m. for that injury report. And of course, I'll be posting all that down in the Discord chat and everything like that. So we'll get an eye on that. Either way, I'm not playing either of them at quarterback, so it doesn't change very much there. We'll go down to the bottom of the board. You can see, well, yeah, we already talked about Mac Jones. Tyrod Taylor might be one of my favorite plays on the slate. So I was expecting this early on the week. I had Mills as the starter just because they still had Taylor technically on IR. But if the guy's healthy, this is an absolute steal of a price tag. If you guys remember in week 1, he threw for 4 touchdowns. He had 300 yards passing. He broke the slate, scored 30 fantasy points. And in week 2, by the time he got hurt, he already had 2 touchdowns and 200 yards. And that was in the first half when he got injured in that game. The guy was off to an absolutely ridiculous start. And no one expected that. I mean, this was the Houston Texans team, that we expected to be an absolute dumpster fire. I think going to him makes a lot of sense here. It's a good matchup against the Dolphins secondary. They've been one of the worst all year against opposing quarterbacks. Yeah, it's just a good price tag, right? You can use Brandon Cooks with them. You don't have a ton of options at wide receiver. You can go to Danny Amendola. You can go to Nico Collins. You can go to Chris Conley. Pharaoh Brown is out at tight end, so you can go to Jordan Atkins. You should get some extra run. So overall, it's just a very underrated stack. I think you can see right here, it's projected for 19 points. I don't think it has the highest ceiling of anyone on the slate. I think that 30-point ceiling in week 1 was about as high as the ceiling is going to get for somebody like a Tyrod Taylor. But for him to go out there and get you 23, 24 fantasy points would be real solid. And down here, Jordan Love. I was a little bit more bullish on him before we had the Tyrod Taylor news. He was that one guy down low that is going to be cheap, that is in a positive game script in terms of over-under. Not huge underdogs or anything like that against this Chiefs team. The line did sway quite heavily when Aaron Rodgers got rolled out, obviously. But I like going to him. You have Devontae Adams on that team. You have solid options like Aaron Jones you can go to. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is back off of the IR. You have Randall Cobb there. There's good stacking options there. I like Tyrod Taylor a little bit more. You're dealing with a better secondary to go against, and overall just a higher over-under game. But if you wanted to go to Jordan Love for that $600 worth of savings, to try and fit in somebody like a Devontae Adams, who's an absolute stud, I couldn't blame you either. What we'll do now is we'll hop over to our running back rankings. So let me go ahead and bring that up for you guys. Here we are. And obviously, we took a little bit more time with our quarterbacks there just because it's a quarterback position. We're talking stacks, everything like that. Here at running back, it's going to be a little bit more straightforward. Let me go make sure stream looks like it's all set. I've had some issues with it muting in the past. Not sure what it is about this streaming software. It seems to be a little bit buggy for me. I'll remind you guys, if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them down on the chat. It can be for season-long fantasy. It can be for DFS, whatever you guys want to talk about. That is what this time is for. So anyways, at the top of the board, in terms of running back, we have some stud options this week that are extremely intriguing. To me, I like all of them. There's not one of the 4 that I really think that we can exclude from our pool. So first and foremost, we have Dalvin Cook here against the Ravens team. This is going to be a shootout. I like using him as a buyback for the Lamar Jackson stack. We go to Austin Eckler. He's a great option to use in stacks with Justin Herbert, or obviously as a buyback whenever you're using somebody like a Jalen Hurts. Christian McCaffrey is active, so this is something that we're not 100% sure about as of right now, but I have him projected as playing as the starter. He's active. They've said that he's a game time decision, but he almost played last week. If you guys remember, he was a game time decision last week. So for me, I think he's definitely a little bit more likely to play than to not play this time around. The matchup against the Patriots isn't the best, but when we've seen Christian McCaffrey play this year, he's been an absolute usage hog, taking about 38% of the offensive touches for the entire offense over there. So whether he's getting the ball out of the backfield as a wide receiver or rushing the ball, he averaged over 22.5 rushing attempts over his first 2 games. Somebody I'll definitely be going to in this circumstance. He's only $8,000. If he was fully healthy, if we knew he was playing at the beginning of the week, he would be $9,500. He would be by far the most expensive running back on this slate. He's just that good. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Again, we'll get an update on that. I'm assuming in the next hour, probably within the next 45, 50 minutes, something like that. And we'll have a lot more clarity then. But as of right now, one of my favorite plays at running back. Alvin Kamara, very good matchup against this Falcons defense. Obviously, Taysom Hill should be running the show at quarterback. And what that means is that we're going to have a ton of dump-off passes. When Taysom Hill has been the starter in the past for this team, Alvin Kamara has had some massive weeks. And while Taysom does take a little bit of Alvin Kamara's rushing upside away, it does also funnel a few more targets his way. Just because Taysom Hill, obviously not the best down the field passer, is a little bit more of a rushing threat at quarterback, a little bit more of a game manager. So as a result, gets a little bit of a boost there. If I had to pick one of these guys up top, so I can see it. I also like Aaron Jones. You say I don't have him down as a yes or a no right now. There's just no way I can play all 5 of them, right? So when it really comes down to it, the ones that I'm prioritizing, so unless you're 150 maxing, if you're 150 maxing, go ahead and play all 5, right? Go mix and match them wherever you need to go. They're all decently owned, but they're all at a point where you can still get some leverage on them. But if I was going to prioritize one or two of them, first, if Christian McCaffrey is playing, he would be option number 1 this week. No doubt about it. The fact that he's been injured is not going to hold me back. It's just he has the kind of opportunity to score 30 real fantasy points, and no one else in this field does. Dalvin Cook would probably be my second option. It's a very good matchup against this Ravens team. He's got a good price tag right there. Also projected to be one of the lower owned options. So that is it for the stud options. Ezekiel Elliott, right? He's in a decent matchup against the Broncos team. I was a little bit higher on him at the beginning of the week just because Cooper Kupp was supposed to be at quarterback. Obviously, they would have relied on the running game a little bit more. Dak Prescott's back. Maybe they still try to protect Dak Prescott, try to make sure he's not taking as many dropbacks, that kind of thing. Give the ball to these running backs. I still like him there. It's a good price tag. He's only $7,000. Cordell Patterson, I'm all right with it, right? You can see he's not a yes or a no for me. Just somebody who doesn't make my player pool due to just not having enough room. You can't play everyone on the slate. Damian Harris there at $6,000. It's a good matchup against this Panthers team, particularly if they go to Walker. I don't know why I keep calling him PJ Washington at quarterback. It's a team that's kind of in shambles. You know, they were good at the beginning of the year. They've kind of fallen apart. And anytime you're looking at a running back matchup, you always have to consider the over-under. You're trying to target guys that are in good matchups, but also in a game where they're favored, right? Because if you're in a good matchup, but you're getting killed by 2-3 touchdowns, it doesn't mean shit. You're not going to be running the ball. You're not going to be getting that production at running back. So he checks both of those boxes for me. Decent matchup, good game script in terms of over-under. Same thing with the spread. Myles Gaskin, it's a good matchup against this Texans team. The unfortunate part is that he's going to be chalky. I have him at 11.8% ownership right now. I would not be surprised in about an hour when we get some of the injury news that he comes in closer to 14, even 15% ownership. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. If he ends up being that kind of chalky, I'm going to be fading him. Darrell Williams against the Packers. I think it's a little bit of a sneaky matchup, right? He hasn't been as impressive as he has been from his first start out. You know, went out there, scored those 2 touchdowns, kind of fell off the board completely. So $5,700, I think that at the ownership level we have him at right now, 9.4%. Again, if some of that gets funneled over to Gaskin, and we're looking at Gaskin a little bit closer to, 15, 16%, Williams could be at 6, even 7% ownership, which would make him an even better play. Somebody I would make one of my core plays on the slate. Chase Edmonds, I like going to. He had that questionable tag throughout the week, so a lot of people are going to be a little bit hesitant to go there, but he practiced fully the last 2 days. It's a very good matchup against this 49ers team. You can see against running backs, they tend to be more stout than usual. But when we consider that Chase Edmonds gets a majority of his usage as a receiver out of the backfield, this is the 31st ranked team in the NFL against wide receivers. So I just say everything you need to know. The matchup is a little bit confusing on paper. It doesn't really tell the whole story. Going down here to Devonta Freeman at $4,900. I really like going to him just because Latavius Murray has been marked out. So he's going to be the number 1 running back here. Last week only saw 4 carries. He did get 6 targets out of the backfield as a wide receiver, though. Le'Veon Bell had 5 rushes last week and only 1 target out of the backfield. So some people are going to try and go and play Le'Veon Bell. They think he's going to go out and be the workhorse back. It's just not going to be the case. For evidence of this, just look 2 weeks prior when Devonta Freeman was easily out carrying and out touching somebody like Le'Veon Bell. Freeman had nearly 20 touches in that game to Le'Veon Bell's 3 or 4. So again, last week was a little bit of an anomaly. This Ravens team was put in a very different game script than what they're used to against this Vikings team, and something that I expect to be a shootout. I expect us to see something that we saw for the rest of the year. I'm not going to let that 1 week sample size completely cloud my judgment. For me, Le'Veon Bell is a non-factor in this game. And now finally for our last value play at running back, Derek Gore. He's a flyer play for me. I mean, not many people are going to go to him. You see, I had him at 5.5% expected ownership. I expect that to come in a little bit lower than that. Nobody is talking about this guy, but they should. This is somebody who clearly got a ton more usage last week. The announcers were talking about how the coaches were raving about this guy, talking about how they were going to get him more and more involved with the offense. And while normally I'd say, oh, that's just coach speak, we saw that in action. They talked about it, and then it happened. And those Sunday Night Football people, they're able to get access to those practices for 3-4 days at a time. They essentially have nothing better to do than to sit at practice all day, just asking them questions. And for whatever reason, Derek Gore came up, and we saw that implemented into the game plan on a national scale. We're expecting them to go out and beat this Packers team. Again, they're without Aaron Rodgers, unless something miraculous happens with Jordan Love. He goes out there and he looks very good. If he's a legit starting quarterback from day one, maybe we get a more competitive game, but I'm expecting there to be some rust there. I'm expecting him to struggle at least a little bit, even if he ends up being a very good quarterback down the road, which I do think Jordan Love will be. Derek Gore is going to be in a very good circumstance. So he got 12 touches last week. I have projected for 16 and a half touches right now, which only puts him at 9.5 points. But we have to remember that he was being used in the red zone. He's being used as their power back. He's being used as somebody out of the backfield as a wide receiver as well. If he ends up getting a touchdown in this game, that 9.5 point projection is going to get blown out of the water. So I like him just because of the price tag. He's obviously $4,000. I expect him to be relatively overlooked. Not a lot of people scroll the whole way down to $4,000 at running back to try and pick somebody. So Darrell Williams obviously wouldn't be playing these two in the same lineup together. I still really do like Darrell Williams this week. But Derek Gore, if you're looking to be a little bit unique, if you're trying to get something different at running back, I think he could very well be the way to do that. What we'll do now is we'll bring up our wide receivers. I'm bringing that up on my end. And I'll share the screen here. Just another 5 seconds. All right, here we go. Wide receiver. All right, so we have like 80 wide receivers projected this week. So I'm not going to go through every player on this list. I'm just going to try and keep it to my core plays here for you guys. And I'll remind you, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them down in the chat. It can be for season long, it can be for DFS, whatever you guys want to chat about. This is what we're here for. All right, so let's check it out, guys. So at the top of the board, you guys can see that there's some stud options. They're all relatively closely priced together as well. So what we've got like 10 guys priced above $7,000. By far the most people in the $7,000 range that I think we've ever seen. It might be for the last even 2-3 years of fantasy. You don't typically see this many guys priced in this range. And this is a condensed slate. This isn't a 13, 14 game slate or anything like that. We're dealing with teams on bye. We're dealing with obviously not the London game or anything like that, but a full allotment of primetime games. So this is a little bit surprising. So what it's going to do is it's going to provide a lot of interesting ownership situations. So when these guys are, spread out in their prices, it becomes a little bit easier to identify who's going to be chalk. With all these guys clustered together and all with a very similar projection, you can see there's a maximum of a 3-point difference between the guys from here down. It's going to make for some interesting ownership numbers. So let's go ahead. We're going to go talk about these guys individually, and then we'll talk about our core plays going throughout it. Davante Adams, he's somebody I will have in my pool. It's not going to be a core play for me this week. He's going to see quite a bit of ownership. Also, we're dealing with Jordan Love at quarterback, so we have no idea what kind of rapport those two are going to have. So I'm going to have right around the field, right around 15, 16% ownership. I think he's still a good play. I just don't think he's somebody that you can completely rely on for this weekend. Tyreek Hill, somebody I will have a lot more leverage on. We're looking at like 30, 35% ownership in my pool as of right now. A lot of it comes down to the matchup. You're dealing with a high scoring game. You're also dealing with that secondary at the Packers that has nobody to match up with his speed. As good as they are technically, people like Jair Alexander, they don't have anybody who's track level speed, 4.2 level speed. I mean, no one does. I don't think there's a matchup in the NFL for Tyreek Hill. So I like him there at $7,900. Good matchup. Stephon Diggs there at $7,700. This is where you're going to start to get some chalk, right? So as of right now, I have Tyreek Hill at 14.3. I have Davante Adams at 17.6. We're going to have to check on that, though. Very well could end up coming down by the time we get our 11 o'clock update here in about 40, 50 minutes. A lot of that comes down to the guy down here, Stephon Diggs. People are going to try and stack him up with Josh Allen in a ton of lineups. I mean, Diggs a little bit cheaper than what we're used to seeing. He's typically up there in the $8,000 range. Josh Allen also in a very good matchup against this Jaguars team. Both of them 31st ranked team against quarterbacks and wide receivers. So I think he's going to be a little bit higher owned than I'd like. He's still in my player pool right now. Somebody I'm fading, at least until we know about his injury status. Deebo Samuel. There's a lot of risk involved with that injury. He's still a game time decision as of right now and is garnering a lot of ownership, and he's pricey. So anytime you have a stud option that's questionable, before I want to put them into my player pool, I always keep them out. I need to hear about that injury news first. But let's talk about these top three. So I'm probably not going to be able to play all three of them. The reason why I wanted to talk about them all individually is they're all likely to be chalk, but one of them is going to be under-owned. If I had to pick one of the three to go a little bit overlooked, it's going to be Devontae Adams, which right now I haven't projected for the highest ownership, but that was with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. So again, I still need to see how it's going to shake out in terms of my ownership, my allocation later on. But I have a feeling that my algorithm is going to tell me he's going to be right around 7 or even 8% owned, which would be a huge difference here. You'd be looking at a lot more ownership on Tyreek Hill, quite a bit more ownership on Stephon Diggs, which we just mentioned. So I'm going to wait to see on that. As of right now, I have all three in my player pool, but one of them is likely to fall out of there. Jamar Chase, he's a fade for me. That game with the Browns is going to be a relatively low-scoring game. The Browns love to dominate the time of possession, which is going to be really bad news for everybody on that Bengals team. Justin Jefferson's a great buyback option for those Ravens stacks. Using somebody like a Marquise Brown, Mark Andrews with Lamar Jackson, and then running it back with a Justin Jefferson sounds like a very intriguing build that I'm going to have a ton of this week. Mike Williams for the Chargers. If you're going to be running back anything on the Eagles side, you can go ahead and do it with him. It's also a very good option for your Justin Herbert stacks. I'm feeling Keenan Allen, solid plays. I'm not going to go into crazy detail there. Brandon Cooks, now that he has Tyrod Taylor back, an even better play. I've been on Cooks almost every single week this year. Will not change this week. Marquise Brown, one of my favorite plays on the slate in terms of points per dollar. You can see over a 3 points per dollar mark. That's when you start to get those elite tier plays in DFS. Like the matchup against the Vikings, you can use them in your stacks or you can use them as a buyback. I like both those options. Amari Cooper, assuming he's healthy and suiting up for this game, it's a very good price tag. Having Dak Prescott only boosts his production there. I do expect Amari Cooper, also CD Lamb. So CD Lamb's up here at $7,200 to be a little bit chalky this week. You know, obviously they were priced down a little bit because of Cooper Rush expected to be starting at quarterback. But with Dak Prescott back, good price tags on them. I'm going to be siding with Cooper. You know, I'm not going to be playing both of them this week. I just think that $1,500 difference in price tag is going to make a huge difference. Jalen Waddle, you can go to. I don't hate playing him this week. It's a good matchup against the Texans. Just not somebody I'm prioritizing as of right now. He's very likely to bleed into at least 5 or 6% of my lineups, though. Kenny Golladay, he's still questionable down here. You can see I don't have him as a play. I don't have him as a fade or anything like that. If he plays, he's a decent option. If he's marked out, Kadarius Toney, the guy priced at that same price mark on that same team, is an insane play. Kadarius Toney would go from right around a 7 target projection to right around a 10.5 target projection, which takes him from being a solid play here in this mid-range to one of the best plays on the entire slate. He would go from around a 2.8x projection in terms of point per dollar to over a 3.5x projection. Putting him on par with somebody like a Devonta Smith just below him, who is one of my core plays for this week. So keep that in mind. We're going to have to keep an eye on that Golladay news. Not really particularly for him. You know, he's not somebody I'm playing, but again, for Toney. Hunter Renfrow was somebody I was considering before the Henry Ruggs news. Obviously did these projections before then. Now that he's at $4,800, he's an even better play, right? So this number right here for the 16.5 point projection does not include the Henry Ruggs news. So that's at, let me double check here on this, on the other sheet. 1 second, guys. I have him projected for 6.8 targets. I have him projected for 8.1 targets now. So that 16.5 point projection is probably closer to something like a 17, even 18 point projection. And at that mark, he's almost a 4x value. I mean, that is something that we don't see very often on these slates. So you guys can see, you know, this high 4K range, this low 5K range here, it's a sweet spot for a lot of this value. You know, when we start to get down to this mid 4K range, obviously the whole way down to $3,000, we're dealing with people that are going to be very hit or miss, people that don't have huge target shares, people that are dependent on the deep ball, that kind of stuff. So that's why you're going to see far less yeses in this range. A lot more people that I'm just full out fading. People that I'm willing to go to as pure flyers. You know, Bryan Edwards is going to be starting for the Raiders now, obviously with Ruggs out of the rotation. Brandon Ayuk is in a high scoring game against the Cardinals. He's also somebody who's a deep play threat, so you could go that way. Mecole Hardman is completely mispriced. Should be right around $5,000, so you could go there. He's jumping off the board in terms of points per dollar. Marcus Valdes-Scantling, now that he's starting for the Packers, obviously mispriced as well. Olamide Zaccheaus, he's going to be starting because of Calvin Ridley not playing due to personal reasons. He's also been underpriced for this slate. It's just a very tough matchup against the Saints. I'll still be playing him, though. I'm not going to let the matchup completely take me off of him. KJ Osborne, it's a good situation against this Ravens team. You can use him as a cheap buyback option for any of your Ravens slate. Devin Duvernay, he's going to be in my player pool. I'm going to have probably 3 or 4% just because of those Lamar Jackson stacks. And these last two options, guys. Danny Amendola, one of the best plays on the slate in terms of points per dollar. You can see he's the only player that cracked the 4x mark in terms of that. A lot of it just comes down to the matchup. A lot of it comes down to opportunity as well. You're dealing with Tyrod Taylor returning to the offense. And the best game by far Amendola's had all year was week 1 when he had Tyrod Taylor. Had over 7 targets. He had a touchdown, 60 yards. While I don't necessarily expect that same type of production, he has at least the opportunity to go out and do so. And finally, Jared Guyton, he's $3,100. He's at least playing snaps for the Chargers team. He's playing about 30% of snaps this point of the year. He's really cheap. He's playing for Justin Herbert. So as a pure flyer, I definitely think you could look his way. And now we'll bring up our tight end projections. So just go ahead and give me a second. I'll bring them up here. And what we're going to do after this is we're going to go ahead and make some lineups. We're going to talk about some game theory, some of the stacks I'll be considering, and all that kind of fun stuff. And as always, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them down in the chat. And after we get through these tight end rankings, we'll hop right into those. So cool. We have our tight ends up here. Let me go ahead and zoom out. The formatting on this one seems to be a little bit different. All right. And make sure it's good on the streams then. Looks like it is. All right, fantastic. So we have a couple interesting situations at tight end. There's one major injury with Dawson Knox. But George Kittle, the guy I have highlighted right there, is coming back from injury. He was activated from IR. That was kind of a 50-50 proposition coming earlier in the week. And while we're not sure he's going to be at 100% health, he's not sure if he's going to be playing 100% of the snaps. He's only $5,200. For George Kittle, that is nearly $2,000 too cheap. Is a very solid matchup against this Cardinals team. Anytime you're looking at tight end matchups, especially in terms of like points scored against them or anything like that, that is going to be an extremely volatile stat. These tight end matchups, I almost completely ignore, to be quite honest with you. That's one of the only positions where that's the case. It's just very dependent on touchdown production. And just because a guy is scoring a 1-yard touchdown against you, it doesn't mean that you're bad against tight ends, right? A lot of it's just down to circumstance. It's just due to variance. So as we get later on in the year, maybe towards weeks 13, 14, something like that, might start to be a little bit more reliable, but even just 8 weeks into the year, it's still going to be extremely noisy. So I don't worry about that matchup. It's a high-scoring game. This Cardinals team doesn't have any linebackers that scare me in terms of their pass coverage ability, anything like that. A couple people up top we can consider. So first and foremost, Mark Andrews. He's a very solid option to use with Lamar Jackson. You can use him as a buyback option for any Vikings stacks. Kyle Pitts, he's a much better matchup than a lot of the wide receivers for the Saints. The wide receivers are going to have to deal with Marcus Lattimore. They're going to have, I forget who their second corner is there. I was watching their game the other day, just skipping my mind right now. It's on my tongue, but somebody who's an absolute stud. They have 2 legit Pro Bowl level cornerbacks in New Orleans, which is just ridiculous. They have a very good pass rush as well. I mean, just 3 or 4 guys that are going to get 10 sacks this year on that defense. So not a very good matchup for those guys outside, not a good matchup for your quarterback. But the good part about that whole situation is that the tight end is going to get extra looks, and he's not affected. He's not going to be covered by those cornerbacks. He's also going to be the guy that he's looking to as a bailout option. You know, the tight end usually running shorter routes, usually running some of those screen routes, slip passes, that kind of thing after throwing out a block, a chop block, something like that. So Kyle Pitts, I do expect to have an all right matchup here. If I'm going to go to anybody on that passing offense, it's going to be a Kyle Pitts. Travis Kelce is a little bit expensive. He's also going to be a little bit popular, but I don't think you can ever go wrong using somebody like a Travis Kelce. He's going to get you a ton of targets. He's by far the best talent on this entire slate. So as of right now, I have him projected for 8.1% ownership. I'm probably looking at around a 20% exposure. So not going crazy on him, but going to be my most used tight end. Probably followed by George Kittle. George Kittle, I'm probably looking at getting 20%. Probably going to double up the field there. He's definitely going to be owned. I mean, just because that news came out early, everyone knows about it now. It's clearly underpriced. He's going to be popular, but not something that I'm fading. You know, it's obviously very high projection. Let's talk about some of the mid-tier guys that I see myself going to. So Dalton Schultz here, you might want to go to him just because Blake Jarwin's out. I have him down as a no. I don't expect this game to be super high scoring between the Cowboys and the Broncos. So that's why I'm not overly excited about somebody like Dak. I'm not overly excited about a CD Lamb. Even some of the guys on the other side of the ball, not super thrilled about. So you could go there if you want to, though. He's obviously going to have some extra targets given to him. So perhaps maybe closer to a 14-point projection rather than a 12.7. Zach Ertz has been great for the Cardinals ever since he got over there. It's a good matchup against this 49ers team. You could definitely go there. One of my favorite plays at tight end is going to be Dallas Goedert. In terms of points per dollar, he's, I believe second on the entire slate, only behind Jared Cook down there, which we're going to get to here in a second. It's a good matchup against the Chargers team. It's good to use in stacks if you're stacking up the Eagles side. You can also use him as a buyback for any of your Justin Herbert stacks. Someone else from that same game that I'm going to have a ton of this week is my highest point per dollar play at this position. He comes in with a great matchup. He's been good of late. He's been seeing tons of red zone usage. And for whatever reason, saw a price decrease. I do not understand their algorithm there sometimes. Sometimes their pricing spot on. Sometimes it makes absolutely no sense. This is one of the situations where, again, it just doesn't make sense. I'm going to be playing a ton of them. He's only projected to be owned in 6.2% of lineups. I'm going to have closer to maybe 25. So between a Jared Cook, a Dallas Goedert, a Kittle, and a Kelsey, you're looking at 90 to 95% of my exposure. I'm definitely going to try and focus on those guys. Some of the people that'll be mixing in a little bit left and right. Obviously, Mark Andrews, whenever I'm stacking up Lamar Jackson, going to be somebody I'm prioritizing. Kyle Pitts is more of the guy that I'm going to sprinkle in. The rest of these guys here, I'm not too thrilled about using. Albert O, he was going to be one of the best value plays in the entire slate. He's questionable. He has an injury of his own now. So even if he ends up playing, we're not sure if he's going to be to 100% speed. We're not sure if he's even going to be utilized as a wide receiver as he typically is because he's dealing with a lower leg injury. And anytime that happens with one of those big guys, you never know how they're going to react to that. So he's still a yes. I'll still have him in my lineup, but not nearly the play that he was earlier on in the week. And in terms of using, so this is something I meant to mention on this live stream before, is don't be afraid to use some of these tight ends at the flex spot. So a lot of times people try to fit in an extra running back. They try to fit in an extra stud wide receiver or something like that, which sure, if you have the salary, go ahead. If you have a guy that projects higher, I definitely recommend doing so. But more often than not, when you're building lineups, particularly by hand, you're going to be left with $5,500 left. You're left with $4,800 left or something like that. And rather than going and changing the rest of your lineup, maybe taking a worse defense, maybe changing from one of the stud wide receivers to a cheaper wide receiver, just to try and fit in someone different, don't screw your entire lineup. You spent all that time building and selecting players. How about try to make something work with the salary that you have? And a way to do that is to take one of these tight ends, to go to a George Kittle at $5,200. That's completely mispriced. To go to a Dalton Schultz, that's in a good situation without having to deal with Blake Jarwin. To go to somebody like a Dallas Goedert, who, again, is in a very good matchup. So that's something that I'll be doing this week. It's something that I'm never shy of doing. There's people out there that will recommend to, never take a tight end at the flex spot. Almost every, I'd say about 3-4 times a year, you're going to see the winning lineup, the optimal lineup, have tight end at the flex spot. So it's not something that happens once a blue moon or anything like that. It happens just about as likely as you would expect, just as likely as all the other positions. So I think that's a little bit of a false narrative out there. What we'll do now, guys, is we're going to go ahead and bring up Draftkings. We're going to go ahead and make a few lineups together. We'll talk about some of the thoughts I'm going to go through while building my lineups, some of the game theory I'll be using and stuff like that, just to give you guys an idea of how you guys can start building your own lineups. So let's bring this up here. All right, let me share my screen here. And again, if you guys have anyone you want to see in a build, if you guys want to see me try to stack up certain players, I'm more than willing to go ahead and do so. So, all right, we're going to do a GPP build here. So we'll do a cash build after. Perhaps we'll do a couple lineups, so we'll rotate or something like that. But this is going to be for a GPP build. So my favorite stack, and we're going to assume that we're going to use a stack on this one. We're also going to do a GPP build with our second one that is a non-stack. So just to show you guys what I was talking about at the beginning of the live stream, that stacks aren't the role here. I'm definitely going to be using Jackson or Herbert. So you got to really decide on what you're looking for here. If you're looking for a 2 or a 3 person stack, I think Justin Herbert's going to be the way to go. If you're looking for more like a one-off stack, not trying to get completely invested into a game, Lamar Jackson would be the move. But for this, since we are making a stacking lineup, we're going to go ahead and go with Justin Herbert. What I usually like to do next is try and figure out what our stack's going to look like, right? I try to make the rest of the lineup fit around the stack. I usually find that to be the most profitable way to make these lineups. So for me, in terms of a charger stack, I really like going to Cook. I think Cook is a vital option of these stacks. You're not only dealing with somebody who has tons of red zone upside, so obviously you're going to see tons of snowballing effect from Herbert throwing touchdowns to Cook. He's got a good matchup against this team. And now that we have a little bit more money, so we took a little bit of a cheaper option for our stack option there, we might be able to spend up for a Keenan Allen. I like that idea. We could also go to a Mike Williams. So how about we go ahead and put Williams in there for now at $7,100. If we need to spend down, save that extra $700 and go to Allen, we can go ahead and change that in the future. But for now, we'll leave that there. Now we can consider whether we want a buyback option or not. So for me, if we're going to be running a two-man stack, quarterback and two wide receivers, you're probably going to want to buy back. So for me, a prime candidate for that, we can either look to somebody like a Dallas Goedert. So we could run the two tight end set, which I just mentioned, which might be what I end up doing here just to show you guys what that'll look like. Or we can go to DeMonte Smith. So Smith is obviously, he's $5,200. And with Goedert, we are looking at $4,800, I believe. No, sorry, even cheaper, $4,500. Let's go ahead and see what our lineup's going to look like if we take Goedert there. So we go to the two tight end setup, which should make our lineup unique almost by default. A lot of people don't like going to that setup, like I just mentioned. Plus, we still get a really high median projection, so we're not really losing out on anything. What I'll do next is I'll go ahead and try and plug in a defense. So a huge mistake that DFS players will make is they'll wait until the last spot to plug in a defense, thinking that, oh, whatever, it's just a defense. What the hell does it matter anyways? When in reality, defense is one of the most important positions for DFS. Sure, it's one of the hardest to project, but usually there's 3 or 4 defenses every week where everyone goes, oh, yeah, they're going to have a good week. They're going against a backup quarterback. They're going against a rookie quarterback. They're going against a team that's scoring less than 15 points on average per game. So whatever the situation is, usually we're able to identify 3 or 4 of those defenses. And for me, I usually try to condense my pool on those 3 or 4 defenses. Obviously, if you're trying to look for that defensive touchdown, if you're trying to look for that one defense that just somehow scores 20 points, probably not the best strategy. But for me, I try to take more of a condensed pool because I'm not looking for that team that goes out there and gets you 1 point on defense. It is a bane of my existence. The amount of times I've had an amazing lineup where I've had all the stud options go off on a slate, and then I've had a defense score like half a point or 1 point and me not take down a GPP. It's happened more than 10 times. So I've changed my strategy since then. I've had a lot more success having a more condensed pool at defense. So if I'm having defenses that go out there and score at least 6-7 points, I'm at the very least not killing myself. I'm not shooting myself in the foot over that type of a score. So I just wanted to give you guys my defensive strategy there because there's so many conflicting opinions on that throughout the industry. Most of them saying to spread it out at defense, and I completely disagree. Anyways, on terms of defense, I like to try and save some salary if I can. One of the cheaper options that I would consider going to down here, Patriots are the expensive defense. Where's the Browns? It's the Browns defense. So Browns defense, right? They're $2,500. So they're $500 above the minimum. They're going to be trying to hold the ball as long as humanly possible against Joe Burrow. They're also just a relatively talented defense. They have a good pass rush. Their secondary is getting healthy. They have some good bodies back there. I think they're in a good spot here. So I'm going to go ahead and plug them in here. Someone else we could use instead, right? So perhaps if we wanted to spend up, I mentioned the Patriots. They are the most expensive defense on the slate, but we have no idea who's playing quarterback for this Panthers team. If they go ahead and announce Walker as a starting quarterback there, he's almost a smash play at defense. Not he, they are. They're almost a smash play at defense. Walker's a XFL quarterback. I expect him to go out there and struggle mightily. So either go to the Patriots, either go to the Browns. Really depends on if you have the salary. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the Browns to give us that extra salary. But if we end up having extra at the end, we'll go ahead and spend up. So now we're at running back, right? So we have our stack out of the way. We have our buyback. We have our defense now. Now we just want to try and take the highest projected plays, period. So for me, in terms of points per dollar at running back, there's a few core plays that I'm considering. So first and foremost, that Dalvin Cook game, I like using him as a one-off. I like using him in stacks. So I'm going to go ahead and click him in there. The only reason I didn't take McCaffrey, who I mentioned before is one of my favorite plays on the entire slate, is the price tag, right? He's $8,000. We were at $6,000 average remaining per player. So didn't really want to spend up too much there. I guess he's only $300 more. Let's see what the lineup will look like. He's only $300 more than Cook. So we're obviously going to need a little bit of a cheaper running back now. I don't want to go the whole way down to Derek Gore down here. I think that would be a little bit too much. I think trying to take one of these mid-tier running backs makes a lot of sense. A Devontae Freeman would be a very good option there. Freeman obviously going to be starting for this Ravens team because Tyson Williams is out. And again, like I mentioned before, I'm not letting that one game sample size where last week he didn't have a huge game cloud my judgment too much. Let's see if there's anyone else we could plug in here, though. We are very likely to go to Devontae Freeman. He's one of my favorite plays in this slate. Myles Gaskin, right? So if you wanted to spend a little bit more money, if you were okay eating the chalk, obviously he's going to be a lot more popular. You could go that way. Yeah, for me, we're going to put in Freeman, move on for that. Let's look at wide receiver now. So now we have $6,300 remaining per position, which is a good amount. We can spend up for a stud option if we want. We can take a mid-tier guy, or we could take two just mid-tier options. So let's go ahead and see what it looks like either way. So for me, Brandon Cooks, if we're going to take somebody in this mid-tier, I think he makes a whole lot of sense. So we could go ahead and click him in there. That would leave us with $6,600, which would have us probably looking at somebody like a DJ Moore, which I'm not really all about this week. So let's go ahead and not take Brandon Cooks. Let's go with the stud and dud option. So for me, Tyreek Hill's probably the guy I would immediately click on the most. Again, really high over-under right here in this high-scoring game against the Packers. You're also dealing with a guy that needs to bounce back. You're going to see Patrick Mahomes have a big game over these next two games. So you could go to him. If you didn't want to take Tyreek Hill, if you think Patrick Mahomes goes out and struggles, Stephon Diggs makes a lot of sense. He's going to be a little bit chalky, but he projects very well for his price tag. Justin Jefferson, you could go to as well. I don't really like going to Jefferson here just because we have Devontae Freeman. But, I mean, if you wanted to just go with a small little game stack in hopes that that's just a shootout, that, Freeman ends up scoring a few touchdowns, same thing with Jefferson, you could do that. It's not the worst option. But with all that being said, let's go to Diggs. Let's plug that in there. He's going to be a popular option this week. Probably somebody that a lot of the guys that are watching this right now, you guys are going to take this week. So it makes a lot of sense. So now that we have all of that set, we could go to Jerry Jeudy. So Jerry Jeudy, solid option there. He's getting healthy. He had the most catches of anybody on that team last week, which is always good to see. Russell Gage did he end up with 0 catches? Yeah, he did. Last week, everyone played Russell Gage. Ridley was out. You were dealing with a lot of other injuries on that offense. And then he went out and got 0 targets. And it's not like he didn't play. He was playing almost every snap, yet he still saw 0 targets, which is completely mind-boggling to me. I'm probably not going back there. That was just such a bad situation. But keeping that in mind, I would not be surprised if we went out there this week and had 10 targets for like 8 catches and 100 yards. It's just... that's the kind of shit that happens in DFS from time to time that just makes you scratch your head. I might play him in my pool just in case, because that would be the most frustrating thing. And the thing is, he's shown a lot of usage in this offense in the past. He's been very good with that usage as well. I don't understand at all why he wasn't a factor last week. Hunter Renfrow there at $4,800. He's who we're going to click in here. We already mentioned the fact that he's likely to get extra targets this week with people like Ruggs, obviously not on the roster anymore. You can see we're leaving $200 of salary on the board. So if there's anybody you wanted to go ahead and upgrade, you can go ahead and try to do so. If you didn't love Goddard at tight end, let's take a look at who we can end up putting in there. Not really anyone to write home about, right? If you wanted to go up to Zach Ertz, if you didn't really like Dallas Goedert, go ahead. But for me, Goddard projects higher, right? So for me, I'd much rather go down to Goddard, who not only is going to be a little bit lower owned, but he projects higher. So that would be our first GPP lineup right there. Let's do a cash build for you guys now. So anytime I'm running cash, I don't usually do a stack, right? Because whenever you're running a stack, you're usually sacrificing a little bit of the optimal lineup. You're usually taking people from the same team just because they're on the same team. They have that positive correlation. You're not always taking the best plays. So we're going to go ahead and fix that this time around. And at quarterback, if we are doing this type of a build, Tyrod Taylor is almost certainly going to be my cash build quarterback. He's only $5,000. He's in a very good game script against this Dolphins defense. He's been one of the worst defenses in the NFL. I don't think we need to overthink it at quarterback. Tyrod Taylor is going to be our cash game quarterback here. And now we get to running back, right? So Christian McCaffrey would not be a good cash play at running back just because of the injury. We're not sure the type of usage that he's going to get. Somebody who's an absolute machine is Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler gets tons of catches out of the backfield. We know he's going to get some rushing upside as well. So for somebody with the highest floor in this range, definitely Austin Eckler makes a lot of sense. Now let's go to defense. I always like to get my defense in here early when we're running a cash build. And a lot of that just comes down to making sure we're taking a safe defense, right? Obviously Browns would make a lot of sense, but they're maybe not the safest option just because the Bengals have been good this year. We're making more of a bet on that Browns defense than the Cincy offense being bad, if that makes sense. Some of these guys further up the board, though, we are betting on that offense being completely atrocious. So for me, somebody we could take a look at, this Patriots defense, we already talked about them before. We don't even know who's playing quarterback for the Panthers. So if we end up hearing that Walker's starting at quarterback, Patriots would be a very solid option for defense. Let's go back to running back now. So we already spent up at running back. We also spent up at defense. So we're probably going to have to make sure we take a relatively cheap running back here. So Devontae Freeman, we obviously had in our GPP lineup. I'm not as certain I'd want to have him in cash. He's going to get some touches, but still has some volatility to his game. I don't know if there's anyone super duper cheap we'd want to go to. Derek Gore is way too risky to be using in a cash game. So yeah, we're going to have to spend up in this mid tier. We're not going to go bonkers on it though. So some options for cash that I really like. Elijah Mitchell is going to get a ton of carries. Myles Gaskin's probably the one that makes the most sense. Not only is he going to be the most chalky, which for cash games is actually advantageous. He's in one of the higher over-under games right here. He's also somebody that we can use as, I guess, kind of some correlation with Tyrod Taylor. Obviously, we have another side of that game. In cash, I'm not really worried about correlation, like I said before, but it never hurts, right? If you have some correlation that just ends up funneling its way into the lineup based on circumstance, I don't think you should let that hold it against you. All right, let's go over to our wide receiver position. So again, because this is a cash game, we're not always worried about correlation here. So we're just trying to take some of the best plays on the slate. And in terms of points per dollar, if you guys remember, that low 5K range has some of the best plays on the entire slate. So we're going to have to see about Kenny Golladay to see whether he's active. If he's not, Kadarius Toney becomes one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. Hunter Renfrow is somebody we definitely want to be jamming in here. I know we jammed him in the other lineup, but in cash, he's even more so a priority. He scored over 13 fantasy points in all but one game this year. All but 2 games this year. That should pretty much tell you everything you need to know about his production. He's extremely consistent. And while he's not going to go out there and break the slate, he's typically getting you what you need to get by in cash at the very least. Let's take someone else from this mid-tier wide receiver range while we're down here. I think it makes a lot of sense. Jalen Waddle makes a ton of sense, especially because we're not going to have Devontae Parker this week. Parker was added to IR towards the end of this week in practice. So Waddle, already somebody who was seeing plenty of targets for this offense. He's a very good matchup against this team. So even though we already have Myles Gaskin here, I don't hate going to a Jalen Waddle. They don't negatively correlate enough to really make a difference here. And again, I'm not really worried about correlation. We're just taking a look at the highest median projection. And the reason why you can play both together is Waddle's very dependent on PPR upside. He gets a majority of his points just from catching the ball. He's running a lot of screen passes, a lot of short routes. So again, that negative correlation isn't enough to keep him out of my lineup. Let's go over to wide receiver now. So we took some cheap options. We only have 3 options left on our team. How about we actually take a look at tight end? Let's take a cheaper tight end. Let's get it marked out of here so we can maybe spend up a little bit at wide receiver. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and take Jared Cook. He's the highest point per dollar play in the entire slate at tight end, so I like going there. Anytime you're looking at a cash game, you're just trying to take the best play. So now we're cycling back to wide receiver. We have some money to spend. So if we wanted to take a nice flex guy, we might even be able to fit in somebody like an Alvin Kamara. So actually, let's go ahead and see what that would look like. Let's go ahead and just put Kamara at flex, which I really like a lot. He's one of the highest just pure projections on the slate. So anytime you can fit him in at a flex spot, going to be a good spot to use him there. And we still have $5,300, which is going to let us spend up for a pretty good option here. The guys at $5,300 exactly, none of them really stand out too much to me. Christian Kirk, decent matchup against the 49ers, but not anyone I'm prioritizing. Toney could be somebody to slot in here, especially if Golladay ends up getting marked out. Devontae Smith's most likely the guy I'm going to go to. Not only are you dealing with somebody who's projected for 4x value. Again, we saw that on the spreadsheet a little bit earlier. He's in a good matchup here. We get a little bit of correlation going off with Austin Eckler there. And again, I'm not super worried about the correlation. You can see also with Jared Cook as well. But it's at least helpful. So for me, this would be by far my favorite cash play on the entire slate. If you wanted to take a cheaper defense, let's say you went down to the Browns, right? So we like the Browns defense this week. You'd have an extra $1,700 to spend. So maybe you don't like Devonta Smith. You could spend up there. I still like Devonta Smith. I'd probably keep him in there. If you wanted to go to a better running back, you can go up here and spend for an Aaron Jones. You could take Ezekiel Elliott, who made my player pool earlier. So there's obviously some things you can change here. I personally like going to the stud defense. I think it's a little bit underrated for fantasy, but obviously each to their own there. What we'll do now is we'll do another GPP lineup. This will be the last lineup we do. Then we'll get out of here so you guys can make your lineups and whatnot. But this is going to be a GPP lineup where we do not use a stack. So at most, we're going to take a quarterback. We can maybe use one target from his own team, but that's it. We're not going to go to 2 or 3. We're not going to use a buyback. And in terms of analyzing the winning lineups over the last 2-3 months to start this year, there's been a ton of non-stacks winning. Actually, more non-stacks than stacks winning, which is a huge difference in what we've seen in the past with DFS. In the past, stacks correlation has been the name of the game. It's how you made a profit playing NFL DFS. And perhaps it's the fact that everybody's came around to it. Everyone has started implementing the stacking strategy. Or perhaps it's just a change in the meta in general. Teams are passing the ball more. You're seeing higher scoring games in general. So targeting one game isn't as advantageous, right? Trying to take the highest scoring player from a variety of different games is a lot more advantageous when you see higher scores in general. So it's a combination of those two factors. That's why we're going to be doing it this way. So if we're going to be running a team with no stack, Lamar Jackson is just a clear choice here for me. Lamar Jackson has rushing upside. It's the highest point per dollar play on the entire slate at quarterback. I'm not going to overthink that one there. If we go to running back, let's start filling in some of these cheap value options, because anytime you're running a cash lineup, you're just trying to jam in as many of those stud plays as you can. Let's go to the Browns defense this time rather than the Patriots. At tight end, let's not double up on somebody like a Jared Cook, right? There'd be a little bit of exposure. Let's go to a Sweeney here. Sweeney's going to be starting for Buffalo. Obviously, a good matchup against Jaguars as well. So he's a little bit less of a popular option for that team. Let's go over the wide receiver. So rather than going to Hunter Renfrow, let's go to somebody who projects out very well for me. We already talked about Danny Amendola earlier. Going to be starting. He's going to have Tyrod Taylor back. He's only $3,200. Going to give you plenty of flexibility. We go over to running back. We're not going to want to go to Derek Gore, but we can try to take someone real cheap here or try and keep our lineup cheap as possible. Probably going to go to Freeman. So it'd either be Freeman or an Edmonds. Let's go with Freeman. Freeman, again, starting for this Ravens team. Actually, we can't do that. So there is a lot of negative correlation between Lamar Jackson and Devontae Freeman, just because Lamar Jackson dominates rushing the ball for that team. So probably not going to want to go with Devontae Freeman there. That was a good catch. Chase Edmonds makes a lot of sense. We go with Myles Gaskin. Let's go with Edmonds to make it a little bit of a cheaper option here. So at this point, we have a ton of salary left. So the whole point of us starting with these value options is now we can kind of just pick and choose whoever the hell we want in this lineup. So Edmonds, he's got a good matchup against the 49ers. He's a very good spot to have a ceiling game. Same with Danny Amendola. We already talked about the fact he's only $3,000. And Sweeney as well. So now we're looking for just guys that have GPP winning upside. And at the running back position, we're going to be able to take one of these studs. Probably going to be Alvin Kamara. I mean, we used him over in the cash build. He's going to get a ton of targets out of the backfield this week, particularly with Taysom Hill at quarterback. So I think he's a solid option there. If we don't want to use the same running back, if I want to give you guys a little bit of a different look, I think going to Dalvin Cook makes a lot of sense. We used him in our first GPP lineup. He gives us a slight amount of, stacking leverage here. I mean, obviously, rather than taking a stack from the same team, taking a Lamar Jackson and then maybe a Marquise Brown or something like that, we can create our leverage and our correlation by taking somebody from the opposite team. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do there. Now we're on to wide receiver. We still have quite a bit of salary we can go ahead and spend. Brandon Cooks is a very solid option for this week. He's also got Tyrod Taylor back. We already have Danny Amendola in this lineup, so not the biggest fan of going to that. Let's see. Cole Beasley is a very solid option. If we didn't have Sweeney, I would really like going there. Let's go ahead and put Tony in this lineup. He's a little bit cheaper. It lets us spend up for essentially whoever we want. And now we have a ton of salary. We're going to go to Tyreek Hill. He's our highest projected player at wide receiver. And that lets us have $7,800 left, which means we can either go to Diggs, we can go to Samuel, or we can spend up a defense, which might be the move here. Let's see. So If we go to Justin Jefferson instead, let's see. If we go to Justin Jefferson instead, and then we go to defense, we could take Packers defense isn't something I'm overly excited about. Neither thing with the 49ers. Giants don't excite me. Yeah, none of these defenses really do. So spending up there is not really a problem, not a priority. I mean, yeah. So we go with this. So Deebo Samuel's not somebody I hate this week by any means. He has a 37% target share for that team. I don't think you can go wrong there. But you guys can see there's a drastic difference between this lineup and then the first one we made. Whenever you're using stacks, it kind of funnels you into similar builds. You're taking 3 or 4 of your roster spots, you're dedicating them to one team, usually one for the other side as well, which only leaves you 5 or 6 options to get unique. And a lot of times you're dealing with a similar salary range as a lot of other people. You're getting funneled into the same place, perhaps a Cook at running back, a Kamara at running back. You end up taking a Tyreek Hill, and it makes it even harder to get unique. So that's why I like using some of these non-stacks. It gives you a lot more different permutations. You're able to get a lot more salary permutations as well. You're not getting clustered into some of those corners or anything like that, where you end up sharing a lot of leverage with the field. But yeah, so we have a question down here in the chat I'll get to. So Joey Perp says, Landry, Son, Debo, or Hardman pick 2 PPR. I got to start Debo even with the injury. Yeah. So I agree with you, Joey. I think you have to start him. He's been an absolute stud. He's getting more targets than anyone else in the NFL. Not named Devontae Adams. He's the only one with a higher target share. So I definitely think you do have to go to Debo. But the other one, right? So you're dealing with PPR. Landry's not in the best matchup. He is decent in PPR though. Son, I'm very high on, so I think he might be the option there, or Hardman. Shit. And this is just for season-long fantasy, correct? If you go ahead and put that down in the chat, I'm going to assume it's for season-long fantasy. I would definitely say Debo. And if we're talking about season-long prices aside, everything like that, I'd go with Cortland Sutton. I mean, obviously in DFS, he's a little bit expensive, a lot more expensive than a Hardman or Landry, but should still be seeing a good amount of targets. Yeah, so yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about season-long fantasy then. Yeah, so Hardman, if anyone gets injured, if anybody's not playing or anything like that, use him as your absolute flyer. But yeah, I would go with Debo and Sutton there. Cool, so that's all we've got here for the live stream. Thank you guys for stopping by as always. I appreciate all of your support here on the channel. If you guys have any questions, if you're watching this on replay, you guys can go ahead and put them down in the chat and I'll get to them as soon as I can. So until then, good luck this weekend and peace.